Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. We are going to continue with video 3 in this video series. Don't worry, this one's a whole heck of a lot shorter than the first two. On Articles 4 through 7, kind of the miscellaneous articles at the end of the originally written Constitution before the amendments. But it's not to say they're not important. They're just kind of the general housekeeping items that didn't fit in the first 3 articles. So let's dive right in, shall we? Article 4 is all about the states. So this is where you'll find what's called the Full Faith and Credit Clause, which states that all states have to accept the laws, records, and court decisions of all the other states. This means that if you are a citizen of Texas and you go someplace like Illinois, you should not be punished for not having followed the Illinois law when you lived in Texas. So, and the other thing that this also means is that if you get married in Nevada, in a place like, let's say Las Vegas, that means that when you come back to Illinois, the state of Illinois has to recognize that court record that says that you are in fact married. So the old saying that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, no, it doesn't. If you get married in Vegas, that stays with you until you come back to Illinois. Congress can make laws that force the states to respect each other's laws if they're not following the rules. Citizens from one state also have the same rights as those from the state where they are currently. So what that means is that just because you are a citizen of California, if you go to Massachusetts, you're not treated like a foreigner under the law. You might be treated like a foreigner culturally because people from Massachusetts might be culturally very different from people from California, but legally you are treated like a citizen of the same country because you are. You're just not a citizen of the same state. This also states that you cannot escape justice by moving out of or by fleeing a state. If you are found to be trying to flee across state borders, you will be apprehended and you will be returned to the state where you did the crime to face justice for said crime. This process is called extradition, which I believe is one of your vocab words. So being returned to the state where you did the crime to face justice is called extradition. Congress also has the power to add new states to the Union. That's in this article of the Constitution. There are some rules, though. You can't add a new state within the jurisdiction of another state, so they can't create a new state out of area within the state of Illinois unless the state of Illinois consents to that, saying, yeah, we're willing to give up some of this land to create a new state. You can also form a new state by merging 2 states together. So let's say North Carolina and South Carolina wanted to just become Carolina. All right, they could do that as long as you have permission from both North and South Carolina and permission from Congress. Territories, places like Puerto Rico, Guam, the Mariana Islands, so on and so forth, they get to be ruled the way that Congress decides until such time as they become a state. They go through that legal process. And what this means is that the federal government can sell, trade, or give away any land from those territories. This article also has certain guarantees. The guarantee that nothing in the Constitution is intended to favor one state over the other. So if a piece of legislation favors one state more than another state, it's not intentional. Nobody can intentionally pass legislation that puts an undue disadvantage on one state. Also guarantees that every state in the Union has to have a Republican form of government. So that means that they have to have a representative democracy, an indirect democracy where you vote for representatives. You'll notice when we get into studying the Illinois Constitution that the Illinois government is set up very, very similarly to the U.S. government, and that is because we are legally required to be because of this part of the Constitution here. The U.S. government also, since they don't allow the states to control their own militaries anymore, has to protect each state from invasion, and the U.S. government is legally, constitutionally, in fact, required to help any state put down riots. Essentially, they did not want another Daniel Shays, and they explicitly wrote it into the document that we are going to make sure that another Shays' rebellion does not happen. It just has to be at the request of the state legislature or the governor. So the governor can call out the National Guard, the legislature can call out the National Guard. Moving on to Article 5. Article 5 is all about the process of amending the Constitution. Now, there's two ways of amending the Constitution or changing the Constitution. You can add a formal amendment, of which we have 27, and we'll talk about the process of going through that. That's the part of the Constitution in Article 5. There are also informal ways of changing the Constitution. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the course, but obviously since that's informal, it's not in the actual text of the document. So let's talk about the formal amendment process, the process that's actually constitutionally laid out of changing the physical language, either adding more words to the Constitution or taking words away. First, an amendment has to be proposed. It can be proposed one of two ways. One is that 2/3, a supermajority of both the House and the Senate, must vote to propose the amendment, or it can be proposed if the legislatures from a supermajority of the states ask Congress for an amendment. Then it's proposed. Then it's thrown out into the world, and then it needs to be ratified. It needs to be approved by the states or by the people. So all proposed amendments have to be ratified by the states. There are two ways you can go about that. So the legislatures from 3/4, so not just a supermajority. This is what I like to call a super duper majority. A super duper majority of states have to ratify that amendment, or they can hold a convention. What this boils down to is it's a popular vote. They put it to the people. The people choose delegates to then decide whether or not to approve this amendment. So what this is it's a popular vote for the amendment in a super duper majority of states. If that happens, then the amendment is approved and it is written into the Constitution. This has happened 27 times in our nation's history, but it's a difficult process because it doesn't ask for a unanimous decision, but it asks for something pretty darn close to a unanimous decision, which is a 2/3 majority in Congress or the states, and then a 3/4 majority in the states or of the people. All right. So it's meant to be difficult. In fact, it's so difficult that as of 2023, there has not been a new constitutional amendment added to the document since the 1990s. All right, Congress decides what method they're going to go with, if they're going to propose it, or if the states are going to propose it, or if the legislatures are going to ratify it, or if the conventions are going to ratify it. One note that's interesting is the president has absolutely no role in amending the Constitution. The president doesn't have to sign the amendments, and the president can't veto amendments. So the president's just a non-active bystander in this entire process. Article 6 talks about national supremacy. All right. First of all, they have like some housekeeping items thrown into Article 6. But first, they say that all debts and treaties made by Congress under the Articles of Confederation are still binding under the Constitution. If we had debts under our previous form of government, we still have to pay them. Obviously, this part of Article 6 is now void because those debts have long since been paid. This is also where, this is the important part, you might want to write this part down. This is where the Supremacy Clause is. And the Supremacy Clause states that the Constitution is the highest law in the land. And state judges have to follow this law. Federal judges have to follow this law. State judges have to follow this law, even if their state laws contradict it. The Constitution is always going to be the trump card of any other law in the entire country. And this is what allows federal judges and allows the Supreme Court the right of judicial review. Because if something is butting heads with the Constitution, if a lower law is butting heads with the Constitution, then the Supreme Court has to look at that law and say, okay, that needs to be struck down because it disagrees with the Constitution. Or the Constitution needs to be reinterpreted to mean something different because this law is actually a good law. So that's what the Supremacy Clause does, and that's the importance of it. So make sure you write down that information. They also put here in Article 6 that all federal and state officials also have to take an oath of office. They have to include that they will uphold the Constitution of the United States in that oath of office. Article 7 is all about the ratification of the Constitution. So, ratification. They had to have 9 out of 13 states sign off on the Constitution before it could be enacted. So this is not just a regular majority. The majority puts on a cape and becomes super majority. It's a 2/3 majority. They wanted to do this so that they could have legitimacy. The framers all signed their signatures to the Constitution, and they only enacted it after 11 states ratified it, so that the 2 biggest and most important states at the time, Virginia and New York, could be guaranteed to find this a legitimate form of government before it was adopted. And this would ensure that the document had widespread support before they tried to rule over people's lives. The end. Or is it? But wait, there are 27 amendments. That will be the content of the next 2 videos. Stay tuned. Next up is the Bill of Rights. For now, everyone, have a good evening.